Okay, so now we move on to section 3 here, still dealing with stress and health. And now we're talking about how we deal with stress and health. Section 3 is about coping strategies. So we're going to spend a little time talking about how different people react differently when they appraise certain situations and how we have all of these different coping strategies that we can use. So let's start simply with some generic basic information about the process in general. First of all, we've already used this term appraisal a couple different times throughout the chapter, so I don't know if we've written it as a vocabulary term, but we're going to write it down now. What psychologists refer to, or the term they use to refer to how we interpret a stressful situation, is cognitive appraisal. It says your interpretation of an event that helps you determine its stress impact. Now, as we have already illustrated, different people appraise situations differently, and so the same event could be viewed and appraised as being stressful by one person and maybe not stressful by another. So that definitely is unique to the individual. For example, well, we're going to do a little exercise here and we're going to test this. Let me throw a few situations at you, and let's have you do a quick cognitive appraisal of a few of these things. The first one I put up here, it says, what if I told you today we have a final test in psychology next Monday? What would your immediate interpretation of that event be? What I want you to do is just pause this video for 10 or 15 seconds, and I want you to write down 2 different sentences that would express your immediate reaction to that reality. We have a psych final test on Monday. Pause it, go. Write 2 things down to appraise that situation. How would you interpret that? All right, so now I'm guessing that between all of us that are out there writing down different reactions to this, there's going to be some differences from one person to the next. Maybe some people's reactions would be something like this. Oh man, there are way too many terms for me to remember in this chapter. That's going to be your initial thought. Like, we have a test next week, there's way too many terms. We've gone over too much vocabulary. I'll never remember them all. That's one way to appraise it immediately. Maybe somebody's going to say, oh, we have a final next week. I'm never going to have enough time to study with all of these other things that I have to do. I put in here that we have middle school track and field day coming up this week, and you guys always go and participate in that and help. I'm never going to have enough time with Broadway dinner. I'm never going to have enough time to study for psych because of my sports schedule this week, or whatever it might be. Or maybe someone's going to react to that situation with the immediate thought of, man, if I don't do well on this last test, my grade is going to drop. All reasonable and understandable appraisals of that situation, right? Now, some of you may have appraised it a little differently. There are some alternatives to these appraisals. Maybe somebody hears, oh, we have a psych final next week, and their first thought is, man, I'm in good shape because I have been making sure that I've been looking over my notes every day. This isn't going to be that bad. Or maybe you find out you have a psych final next week and you say, hey, you know what? This has been great. I learned some of this stuff in that sociology class I took with Mr. Hager last year. And a lot of this stuff has been reviewed. I'm going to do fine. Or maybe somebody finds out they have that psych final next week and they say, hey man, Bible's tests are never difficult. The way he sets them up and what he expects, I can get through this no problem. I've been paying attention. So just with those 6 quick little appraisals, you can see how they could vary greatly. Of course, the first 3 are a little bit more negative, and that appraisal is probably going to mean that these people that appraise the situation this way are going to find this event to be a little bit stressful, maybe even a lot stressful. Whereas people that appraise the same situation this way, they're really going to have a situation that's not that stressful for them. So that's going to vary from person to person. It's going to vary based on your experiences so far in the class, the amount of work you've been doing, and also it's going to be affected maybe even by some of those personality things that we learned yesterday. might be affected by how much social support you have in terms of when it comes to your schoolwork. Do you have people at home that are supportive? Do you have friends in the class that you guys can study together? All those kinds of things. So obviously people are going to appraise that situation differently. All right, so you get the idea here. I want to do this with just a couple other examples, to do this exercise a few more times. And now that you see what I'm going with here and what I want you to do, I want to see if you can write down 2 quick, immediate, honest appraisals of a few situations I'm going to throw at you. So I'll throw another situation at you, and then I want you to pause the video for just 10 or 15 seconds, however long it takes, and I want you to write down 2 statements like this that could be reasonable personal appraisals of this particular situation. Let's give it a shot. All right, first one is this. You're on your computer, you got a paper that's due tomorrow, and all of a sudden, boom, you realize for some reason your whole research paper that you've been working on that's due tomorrow is just gone from your Google Docs with no explanation. You can't figure it out. Go. All right. Now, this is a real thing. I hope this hasn't happened to you, but something like this could have happened to any one of you. It's happened to me more than once over my college years and my years of preparing things for my classes here as a teacher, and you got to deal with it, right? So some people's immediate appraisal of that situation on the negative side might be something like, oh my God, there's nothing I can do. I'm just going to have to tell my teacher that I don't have it and I'm going to fail because I didn't turn it in tomorrow, or I can't turn it in tomorrow. Or a more positive appraisal might be, oh my gosh, I only have a few hours before I got to go get some sleep. I have to figure something out. All right, most of what I typed in my research paper is really all included here in my notes. It's just a matter of retyping it. I know that stinks, but I got to do it. Now, depending on how, what appraisal you might have of that situation, it's going to affect how stressful it is for you. First glance, that's a pretty stressful scenario, right? But depending on how you appraise it, you may be able to make it a little bit less stressful. All right, let's try it again. Again, I'm going to throw a situation at you. I want you to pause the video for 10 or 15 seconds and write down 2 statements that could be an honest appraisal if this situation arose for you. You're on your way home from work at the mall by yourself in your car. It's nighttime, it's December, it's cold out, and boom, you blow out your tire on 79. You have a flat tire. Pause the video, write down 2 ways that you could appraise that situation. All right. How did you appraise that situation? Of course, I'm guessing that some people, that could be a very terrifying situation. It's dark, it's 6 o'clock at night, you're by yourself, you're on the middle of the highway, you got a flat tire. And your appraisal might be, oh my God, I'm stranded, I'm going to die here in the cold, snowy winter on 79 all by myself. Or you might find yourself in the situation and your immediate thought is, okay, I got my cell phone, I can make a phone call home and my brother or my sister is gonna come out here and pick me up and we'll deal with the car later tomorrow. That's not so bad. And all kinds of things in between, right? Maybe you dial 911 or call the police to let them know that you're stranded. Maybe you pull from your knowledge of how to change a tire all by yourself because grandma or grandpa taught you how to change a car change a tire when they got a flat last year. Who knows? So there you go. One more example. Let's see if you can appraise this situation. Same thing, I'll throw the situation at you. I want you to pause the video and write down 2 statements of appraisal. This is one that we can all relate to. Hopefully it didn't happen to you, but it's the first day of school in 9th grade, and you're in the cafeteria, you're walking with your tray, and boom, you trip and drop your whole tray of food in the middle of all of your classmates in the cafeteria. And everybody goes, ooh. Pause the video, write down 2 ways that you might appraise that situation. All right, and as you can hopefully you're seeing now, depending on your own individual personality, depending on the specifics of the situation, depending on your own personal experience in that particular situation, whether it be your experience with how to change a tire or not change a tire, or your experience typing quickly a new research paper. All of those things are going to affect how you immediately appraise the situation. Now from there, we have to develop strategies. Once we appraise whether or not the situation is high stress, low stress, mid stress, whatever, we have to develop strategies for dealing with it. And so that's the next thing we're going to look at, is some coping strategies. That last bullet says our appraisals can be influenced by coping strategies. So let's look at what those are. Really, we're going to break it into two different types of strategies. The first are defensive coping strategies, and then the next slide we'll see the second type, and those are active coping strategies. So let's talk a little bit about defensive coping strategies. I listed two here, and your book talks about these two in particular. Your book also illustrates a few others, but two common defensive coping strategies are what we call denial and intellectualization. Denial is something that you are familiar with from whenever we talked about defense mechanisms with Freud's theory of personality, and that's why we see some overlap here, and the terminology is even similar. This is what we would call a defensive coping strategy. This is when we convince ourselves that the event isn't even stressful. We are in denial. Now, when we use denial, the reality of the situation is that it is stressful, and we are able to somehow, at least for a short time or for the time being, able to convince ourselves that it is not stressful. Another way that we can attack a stressful situation using a defensive strategy is through intellectualization. When we use intellectualization, this is when we analyze the situation that we're in, this new stressful situation, from an emotionally detached viewpoint. We try to remove any kind of emotional connection to the situation and just look at it in terms of the intellectual viewpoint, the facts of the situation. Now, these are useful, just like we learned when we covered defense mechanisms in terms of personality development. They can be useful. They do actually provide some time for us to assess and deal with a situation. The problem is, and so that's the good side, but the problem is when they get to be a bad thing is really the way that I just explained denial and intellectualization. Are you really dealing with the stressor? No. You're just buying some time, hopefully, to figure out a way to deal with it, and then you probably are going to hopefully use one of those active strategies that we'll get to in a second. If all you're ever doing is using denial and intellectualization and some of these other defensive coping strategies, that can be really negative. So there was an experiment that was done, and they talk about it in your book, and I just want to read through the example they give in the book, and I think this kind of takes this idea of denial and intellectualization and puts it into a real world scenario. Hopefully this will help. If you're still a little confused about how these work, hopefully this will help. So it says here, and there are definitions of these two on page 431, but I'm on page 432. Hopefully you're reading through this and you can go back and maybe reread this one. But it says both denial and intellectualization can prevent physical reactions to stress. So they can be beneficial. In one study in 1965, 3 groups of participants viewed a film that showed gruesome accidents at a sawmill. One group was told that the injuries were not real, but this was all staged by actors and it was all fake. That would be an example of creating a situation where those viewers could be in denial. They just don't believe that it's even real because they're told that it's not real. So this was like manufactured denial. A second group was advised that they were seeing an educational film about the importance of safety measures and of the workplace. So that group had intellectualization sort of manufactured for them. They removed any kind of emotional connection to people getting hurt, and they were being told that this was an educational film. The third group was told nothing. They were just able to watch a film showing people getting hurt in these accidents at a sawmill. The levels of physical reactions were lower in the first two groups than in the third. Thus, if a person does not evaluate an event or situation as stressful, a stress reaction will not occur. Yet, that is really failing to deal with what could be a legitimate stressor. So that's where we get to the bad part. So in that example, we manufacture a situation where two people viewing the situation can be placed into a denial situation or into an intellectualization situation, and their reaction to it isn't very stressful. When other people are just allowed to view this gruesome film without any information, they have a stress reaction. So, can these be helpful and beneficial and work to some degree? Yes, they can. But you're much better served if you get into this type of coping strategy. This is a list of what we would call active coping strategies. This is where I've talked about this in other parts of the chapter. It's about taking control, being active, or taking action against the stressor. So what I've done here, I'm not going to go over all these. We're going to tweak it slightly here, the way we're going to cover the active coping strategies, but I've listed them here. So you can take a second to copy these down in your notes. But what I'm going to have you do instead is, once you've copied down the list, you're going to go to page 432 in the book, in the PDF in the book. And from page 432 over to page 435, there is a short description of each of these active coping strategies. I want you to read each of those descriptions, and I want you to put one bulleted point under each one that helps you understand and make sense of what each of these is. Now, after you do that, so I'm going to force you to go ahead and go through the chapter and actually read the explanations and put one bulleted point down for each. Then there's going to be an exercise for you to do with some real-world examples, identifying which of these coping strategies you think is being used. So I want you to do the reading in the book and put one bulleted point down first, and then you will see on Schoology there will be an exercise for you to go in, and there's a worksheet that you'll fill out that'll build off of this. So there's a little bit about coping strategies, but you have a little bit more to do with active coping strategies. All right, have fun.